One of the most obvious pieces of evidence for the need for transformation is when the effects of your actions are the opposite of what you're intending. It's really obvious that you need to change your life if all your efforts are not producing just something neutral, but the opposite of what you want. And that is the state of our planet today. No one really wants all the species to be degraded. Nobody wants the ecosystems to go downhill. Nobody wants this. And yet it's what's taking place. So the seventh power of transmutation is about the deep change required, especially by individual organisms, individual people. If things were going just smoothly, it'd be great. We wouldn't have to bother, but it's just the opposite of what we want. Things are going downhill. Another way to think about this situation is that the human species is under the grip of powerful forces, and they are largely unconscious. And our hope here is to shed some light on the nature of these powers, of these forces, so we can actually release ourselves from being determined by them. The most obvious example is that of a population explosion. So we have this deep desire for children, but we don't have a desire for so many children that the whole planet is degraded. And so it's looking at the human condition and asking ourselves, what is really at work here? What's at work with the major decisions that we're involved with? This way of thinking can be put in a lineage of depth psychology. So you have Freud, who comes along and talks about the unconscious and the way in which these powers in the unconscious are influencing our major decisions we're making. And he's talking about a personal unconscious. And so, our relationships within our family are really at work in ways we're not consciously aware of. And, a huge amount of insight was gathered by that. And then somebody like Carl Jung extends this insight and now talks about a collective unconscious. It's not just a personal unconscious, but it actually draws from the whole experience of the human back through millennia. And then Gregory Bateson approaches the same idea, and he says that our way of thinking really draws upon the whole biological community. So really it's the whole ecosystemic mind is the unconscious. And that we need to take that into account if we really want to make good decisions. And so what we're doing here is extending that further and saying that even deeper than that is the cosmos as a whole. It's really the entire universe that is at work in the human. It's an obvious idea now that we know the universe developed over these billions of years. The processes that developed the universe are at work in us. That's really the whole idea. And then our quest then is to find a way into an understanding of these processes, of these powers, so that rather than just being determined by them, we can participate in shaping them in a way that might be beneficial. you can say that our quest here is an understanding of the cosmological unconscious, is really what we're hoping to do. And another way of saying it that goes back to the first scientists that were thinking about this, but it's a nice way to remember it, is that we began studying the universe and the powers in the universe, and like, whoa, it's just this is so fantastic, the different powers of the universe. And then there came a moment when we realized that the powers of the universe were studying themselves through us. So that the processes that shape the human, in the form of the human, we're now studying the processes. So it has this cyclical, this folding back feature. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, I've mentioned before, he was one of the first to really get this idea that we happen to be the generation that is awakening to a realization that we are the universe reflecting upon itself. So in particular, with this particular power, transmutation, we're the power of transmutation reflecting upon itself in conscious self-awareness. And as I hope to indicate, this power was central in shaping the human. So here it is. The power that shaped us is now reflecting upon itself through us. Always with this question of how can this understanding lead to a more vibrant Earth community? That's the whole nature of our quest. Let me say here at the beginning, too, that transmutation is one way to refer to this power, but another way, coming from the language of science explicitly, is natural selection. So transmutation is a way of talking about how form changes through time. Things mutate, things change. I mean, everywhere you look in the universe, things are changing. And one of the most powerful insights into this process is called natural selection, coming out of Charles Darwin's work. So the way to get the overall picture of transmutation is just to see the nature of the universe in terms of these huge moments. There are like 4 or 5 of them. But you have the birth of the universe, and it's these elementary particles. And they go through this major event of transmutation. They change into the form of atoms. Everything changes from a time of just plasma, where you just have elementary particles without structure, just like a huge bath of radiant energy. And then this major change into atoms. The universe as a whole changes. Then we go from clouds, vast clouds of atoms, into the galaxies. That's a huge moment. And then within the galaxies, another archetypal moment of transmutation is when the primal stars transmute into stellar systems with planets. So throughout the Milky Way galaxy, throughout all the galaxies, you have this transmutation taking place. And then if you look at the Earth, if you're focusing on the Earth itself, you have an amazing moment from the Earth being molten, like molten rock, into a living planet. Never to go back to molten rock in that form, and then going from the early forms of life, the transmutation, into the advanced forms of ecosystems, of which the human is a part. So that, by transmutation, that really is what we want to point to, those major moments. Now, having said that, the next thing to say is that throughout, change is happening. So that every moment is a moment of transmutation. It's just a matter of what level of significance is taking place throughout. But one of the things I wanted to point out here is the amazing way in which the universe forces itself out of one era and into another. So that, to go back to that early moment with the elementary particles, it's throughout the universe. If you're an elementary particle, right, and you want to remain as just a free elementary particle, you've got nowhere to go. Because everywhere is transforming into the atoms. So I think it's really worth reflecting on. Trying to understand ourselves in terms of the universe, we really have to pay attention to what the universe does. And the universe forces itself out of one era and into another. The other major example that I've tried to highlight in these lectures is the movement from simple to so-called eukaryotic life. So we're going from one form of life to another. It's the biggest transmutation in the history of life. The simple cells, prokaryotes, the complex cells, eukaryotes. And in the middle of this transformation, we have the change in the atmosphere with all of the oxygen coming forth. In other words, the universe didn't just create a new form of life. It also created the conditions where the old form of life could no longer survive like it did before. It had to go to the margins of things. So the universe is forcing itself out of one major era into another. And so the overriding question for our time is this. What do we do now that we've discovered ourselves in a moment when the universe is forcing itself out of one era? The universe is forcing itself out of an entire era of life called the Cenozoic era. And we are right in that moment. So a 65 million era of life is over, and the universe is insisting we leave it. So how do we participate in this transmutation from the Cenozoic era to the integral era, planetary era? The phrase Thomas Berry uses is the Ecozoic era. How do we participate in this transmutation? That's the question. When we look at the way in which life does move from one era to another, or life moves from one form of life to another, one of the things we notice is that it uses a form of judgment. It uses a form of constraint and judgment and even rejection. So these are powerful processes that enable transmutation to take place. And so just by reflecting on some of them in the past, we might get a sense of what our role is in the present. The first example, just to give a few examples, would be the moment when the Earth began to cool and form a crust. So you have the Earth is molten, and then it finally gets to a point where the surface can harden and become solid. And then you have this amazing moment. What was formerly free, so the movement of the magma in all directions, is suddenly constrained. It's limited. It freezes up into a proto-continent. And even more, when the two continents, if there are two continents, they collide, they meet even further constraints. They're no longer able to just drift whatever way they want. Now they are colliding, and they meet with resistance. And the resistance, the opposition, is what brings forth the mountain ranges. So it's an archetype of the whole process of transmutation. It has to do with constraint on formerly free activity. To insist that things remain as free as they were is to insist on the end of the evolution of the planet. So it's this question of what constraints enable the planet to blossom. one is just outright opposition, resistance, the opacity of meeting another continent. You can't pass through it. You just engage with it, and the mountain ranges come up. Another form of resistance takes place in the life world when the desires of different beings are in opposition to one another. The classic example would be the predator-prey. So you have grasshoppers, and then you have the birds that eat the grasshoppers. They're locked in. They're locked into an oppositional dynamic. And this is at the heart of transmutation. How do we deal with oppositions, obstacles, constraints? You see, the bird provides a constraint for the insect. It can no longer the grasshopper, it can no longer just fly wherever it wants. And likewise, there's a constraint placed on the bird by the grasshopper. It has to actually follow and be fast enough to deal with the grasshopper. But the amazing thing is this. This is the most incredible thing. If you remove the constraints, you take away the beauty of the form. That's the really amazing fact of transmutation. If you make the grasshopper slower, the bird will lose its ability to fly so quickly. If you make the bird slower, the insect over time, when I say it'll lose its ability, over hundreds of generations, if you make the bird slower, the insect will lose the quickness of its visual response. Its mind, its nervous system will dullen, so that the excellence of the grasshopper and the excellence of the bird depend upon their oppositional dynamics. They just rise up together. It is one of the, I think, endlessly fascinating facts about the life process. There's a way in which then, and then this would be the main point, there's a way in which the ultimate destiny of the bird is tied into the grasshopper. That's the point of an earth that's living. It's that the creativity is spread out over the whole community. The creativity of the bird is not inside the bird alone. It's in the bird, it's in the grasshopper, it's in the atmosphere, it's in the whole system. Throughout that whole system, there are constraints and demands and judgments. You see, the judgment enters in powerfully in this way. Those grasshoppers that aren't able to flee from the bird are taken out of the game. That's the harsh part about the life system. The birds who aren't able to capture the grasshopper, they also are allowed to evaporate from the game. So this dynamic, natural selection, is based on an amazing process of judgment. And it's a judgment that leads to simply excellence of form. Or we would say just beauty. It's a judgment that leads to beauty. And this, we see this throughout every aspect of the ecosystems. You have birds going after insects inside of trees, and they're held inside the bark. Well, then the beak of the birds has to change so it can deal with the bark. Through many, many generations, you have this development, this transmutation that leads to a bird that matches exactly the bark of the tree. So the dynamics of opposition and judgment have an amazing overall arc. They go in general from homogeneity to intimacy. So to stretch it way back, you have the homogeneity of elementary particles. all the way to the intimacy of a bird whose beak actually reflects the dynamics of the tree. So you have this communion experience that is developed slowly, slowly, slowly. That's what I mean by intimacy. A population of birds could blow into a forest, all right, and they don't have a deep relationship with the trees there. Over time, they will. So it's a deepening to intimacy. The entire planet has been under this power of transmutation for 4 billion years. And that's why in every region we have the spectacular beauty of the biomes, of the tundra, of the deserts, of the temperate forests. And the mystery here is that the whole, the integrity of the whole, is maintained by this power of judgment and resistance and struggle. That's the system in which humans emerge, in that system. And in a very short time, we have taken the whole system towards collapse. Why? What exactly happened? The power of language, the power of the symbol, enabled humans to get around the dynamics of transmutation, to get around the judgment that was offered by the larger community. This is exactly our challenge. So we, because of this new power of language, we drew in all of the powers of the earth, and we used all those powers for the advance of the human groups. That's what every species does. It finds a way to develop itself. But up until our time, natural selection dynamics would take care of the integrity of the whole. No longer. That's the shift. Because of the power of language, because of the power of conscious self-awareness, we have found a way to get out of the discipline of the community. That's why it's all withering. The planet's withering. So then in a phrase we can say this. Here is the fundamental challenge before us. We are being called to become the power of transmutation in the form of conscious self-awareness. Which means we are called to bring forth constraints upon human activity that previously would have been provided by other members of the community. But given the power of the human, now those constraints on human activity have got to come from humans themselves. Another way to say this is that the community as a whole, the community of life as a whole, is calling upon the human to provide a space for the natural selection dynamics to proceed, at least in part, through conscious self-awareness. So we, in this way, would enable this power that has led to such beauty. We would enable this power to flower in a new form. That's the point of all of the discussion on the different powers. We're at a moment when the very evolution of life is going through a phase change. And that phase change is that the powers can no longer guarantee the integrity of this planet unless they are proceeding, at least in part, through the human. So that's the overall view. Now, to be a little more specific, you can ask this question. Where does the power of transmutation show up in the human group? Many different ways, but primarily through our attempt to articulate constraint, laws, customs, and disciplines a way of thinking about this. Humans have, for 150,000 years, we have been attempting to state what the fundamental laws are. And then we develop customs. And we've even developed personal discipline. Personal spiritual disciplines, moral disciplines, intellectual disciplines. In any event, these are all constraints on human activity. They're an attempt to say this. Some things shouldn't be done. Some things really should be cut out of a life. Some things are going to lead to ruin. And so we've done our best to indicate what these are, and they've led up to this point. In this transition, we notice something about these laws. The laws, the customs, and the disciplines all take for granted the idea that the fundamental focus is the human. That's the shift. That's the fundamental shift. The laws are about making sure that individual rights are protected, making sure that businesses can proceed in a certain way. But now we have this amazing moment when we're asked for a different kind of law. We're asked for laws that enable the whole community of life to prosper. That's the difference. So we're in the middle of this transmutation. And already you can see evidence of this taking place in the Endangered Species Act, for instance. The idea that humans would articulate a law that would protect species for themselves, not just for our economic benefit, but for themselves. This is the evidence, a powerful evidence of this major change in human consciousness taking place. The integrity of the whole now is beginning to surface within our attempts to say what should be removed from the human world, what activities should be removed, constraints upon human activity. This is one act, Endangered Species Act, that's ultimately inadequate. Much more has to happen. But it's helpful to note that in the entire history of Western civilization, there's never been a law like this, ever. So it's evidence of a fundamental shift taking place. I want to say a few things about the way in which the power of transmutation will surface in a human psyche. So when this, like I'm saying, this power and all the other powers, they're present in everyone and everything. These are the powers that pervade the universe. So that transmutation is soaked into every cell, every organ, every organism. But it shows up with sort of heightened capacities in certain psyches. So how can we recognize the presence of transmutation in a human psyche? One way is an intense concern for the bottom line. Now, in our thinking, that's money, but it's in a general sense, it's energy. So an intense concern for the bottom line or energy is an awareness that this is what is going to enable things to happen. It comes down to this. This is where a decision is going to be made, the bottom line. It's a mind that is highly critical and judgmental. So that some minds are just given to that, and they are the human form really of natural selection dynamics at work. The tone can be one that's highly pessimistic because of a sensitivity to the dynamics of the whole. So such a person walks into a group and it can immediately pick up the oppositional dynamics in the room, in the place. There's a way in which there's a sensitivity to the gestalt and a drive for success, a drive for surviving. There's an interesting combination here. It's simultaneously a deep respect for law and for tradition and custom, and yet overriding even that is an insistence upon success. So it's a pragmatic mind that no matter what, there's going to be a way to get through. And so it is, even with this respect for the past and for traditions, it's not a dogmatic mind, because there's an ability to change and to alter, to make it through the challenge before one. The negative form of a psyche permeated with transmutation is a depression. Like it's sort of overcome by the opposition that's felt everywhere. And cynicism, so that it can collapse into that, and even a sense of guilt, so that this power can become frozen in humans in these ways in particular. But maybe just to end on a positive note, that transmutation in the form of a human is a highly disciplined person. It's so different from the person who is deeply involved with emergence. This is a much more chaotic form of human consciousness, the emergence, because so many new ideas are coming in and so forth. But the form of the human that is enabling natural selection to surface is a very keen awareness of structure and a very structured life. Now, I'm describing this in general terms, but I also wanted to just ask this question. What does it feel like to be the power of transmutation as a human? What is the feeling? And various things could be said, but the one I wanted to highlight here is this. When the power of transmutation is most alive in a human, one feels as if one doesn't fit in. There's a way of recognizing that one is simply out of place. And even, I would say, as strongly as a sense of being cut off. It's being cut off and set adrift and rejected. There's a way in which there's a feeling of being excluded and all the wounds that go with that. The woundedness is directly related to the sensitivity. They go together. And then the question is, given this feeling of being cut off and of not fitting in, what is the response? That's the whole point. One of the reasons I wanted to dwell on this particular tone of this power is because those people that feel most wounded and most cut off in this moment are the ones that have the greatest capacity for providing what is necessary in our moment, because they are the ones that actually are already feeling the way in which the universe has made a judgment on the Cenozoic era. Judgment. It's over. And so, there are personal and there are cultural and there are biological, there are civilizational elements and levels to this feeling. But the challenge is to bring them into alignment and to begin to realize that one's personal sense of being cut off and of being and not fitting, that personal sense is actually related to a deeper contour in the Earth system as a whole. So I just had some final remarks on this situation for feeling cut off and wounded, And how to proceed then. In a general sense, we can say what has to happen. The constraints on human activity have got to enable the earth to flower. That's a very, very general statement. But now to begin personally, what does one do with this feeling of being cut off? There are a number of options. One is this. To eliminate that which is causing the feeling. To eliminate that which is oppositional. And I think so much of our present situation is taking that option. It's if you have an enemy, if you have an adversary, that's giving you this feeling of not fitting in. All right, and if someone's wrong here, then eliminate the adversary. That would be one procedure. Another way to proceed would be to acquiesce. And so like an inner collapse. So you become this complete victim. You retreat and you pull away and just really give up. But then there's this third option. The third option is where I was trying to emphasize looking at what life does. The third option sees in the opposition, in the wound, one's destiny. It's right in the direction that is causing the pain. There. It's that which created the wound. That's one's destiny. Because right there you're feeling the way in which the universe is rejecting you, part of you. It's not simple. It's mysterious. It's easy to say, though. The first step has to be to embrace this rejection. In other words, embrace that which is attempting to eliminate those elements of yourself that are actually now maladaptive, that are those elements of yourself that actually are about keeping the modern period going. The modern period is over. The Cenozoic era is over. So what aspects of ourselves are we asked to relinquish? I mean, the list would be long, but this is the question. This is why entering into this dialogue with that which opposes us. A society based on consumerism. That alone. A society based on the idea that we can destroy anyone who opposes us. There are just these deep aspects that we are asked to relinquish. Why is the planet withering? Primarily because humans have accepted a context that is much too small. That's the problem. These major decisions we're talking about cannot be made in the context of a particular job or corporation. They can be made in the context even of a particular culture. They're much vaster. That's the change. Our laws, our civilization has been set up in a microphase way. It's about humans and small subgroups of humans. And we're asked to move to a planetary level. So it's this question of a larger context. So it's in part, it's an embrace of the rejection, and actually to surrender into that. And then as we do that, you see, we are identifying with that which opposes us, always in pursuit of the creativity that will enable a vibrant Earth community. So certain aspects of us have to be relinquished. Here is a fundamental wound that people who are highly sensitive have, and it is the wound of not being seen, the wound of not being heard, the wound of just people not getting us. And like I say, rather than talking ourselves out of that and blaming, in other words, putting all the blame on the other, right? So it's their problem. They haven't the sensitivity to see who I really am. What I'm suggesting is that it's in embracing that wound and developing the excellence necessary to show yourself. So you enter into that dynamic and you find a way. You shed certain aspects of yourself that are actually ultimately shielding who you are. You find a way to develop the capacity to say and to reveal who you really are. And you find a way to be felt by another. So that's moving into the realization that that which opposes you carries your own destiny. So then this other question of context. I wanted just to finish with this question of context. Embracing the oppositional dynamic and then identifying your context in terms of this power of transmutation. This is a huge capacity for humans to identify the context. I'll give you some examples. Here's the first one. The transmutation of elements. So, for instance, helium transmuting into carbon, carbon transmuting into oxygen. That transmutation takes place in the center of stars, and only in the center of stars. You go elsewhere, it doesn't happen. So there it is. That's the context for the transmutation. Now you move to the life world. Animals and plants. Their transmutation involves very particular biomes, very particular biological regions, with the presence of the past in the form of DNA. So you're an animal like this bird, all right, and you're dealing with the bark on a tree and so forth. You are right there in that biome. That's the place where you can enter into a deep relationship with the insects and the bark and so forth. But you are also using instructions that come from the past. You're not aware of that, maybe, if you're a bird. You're just there dealing with it. But all of that lineage is there from the past. And now we come to the human. Here's the amazing thing. What is the fundamental context for the transmutation of the human? I've already said our challenge is we're accepting too small a context. The ultimate context for the human is the universe, because we're aware that there in our communities it is this power that has come over billions of years to give birth to us. And we also know that the decisions we're making are going to influence not just our children, not just our grandchildren, but thousands and thousands of generations into the future. We know that. In other words, if you ask what context are we working in, we're working in the far distant future and the far distant past. So, like I was trying to suggest at the beginning, we really are the universe as a whole, reflecting upon itself in this particular place. So, how do we evolve in this situation? How do we identify the adversaries and the models? Who are the models? Who are the beings that inspire us? For the bird, see, the bird's doing right there at that biome, plus it has these memories from the past. But we have the capacity to actually co-evolve with, interact with all of these other beings that aren't present except through the power of the symbol. So the great moments of beauty in the universe become our guides. They become the criteria we hold up for judging our own activities. And the beings in the far future that haven't yet even come into existence, they become our context of transmutation. We are attempting to become those beings that enable the whole to flourish, guided by the moments of beauty from the past and the visions of the moments of beauty in the future. And I hope you can see the point here. You see, this is the way in which humans drop below just the industrial civilization they live within, or just the developing country they live within. Drop deeper than that to begin to co-evolve in a much vaster context. And in this way, this is the hope. In this way, we begin to align the human energies with the energies of the universe. Align the human energies of transmutation with the energies of the planet.